Welcome back to Roots and Relevance. We are picking up right where we left off last time. We spent some time setting up this parable. We got, I think, to the end of the question. And I think we ended last time talking about the Ordo Amoris, this idea of who is my neighbor? How far out does it go? Which has been in the news, as we know, quite a bit. And so yeah, we're going to get actually into the parable itself. And Jonathan, this time I'm going to have you to read. Let's start with the story this time. We've already kind of set up the question. So if you would start at verse 30.
A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him up, and fled, leaving him half dead, which is interesting because he's, half dead.
Yeah, I'll turn
very important.
Yep.
I already can tell you why. A priest happened to be going down that road, serendipitously. When he saw him, he passed by on the other side. In the same way, a Levite, when he arrived at the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan on his journey came up to him, and when he saw the man, he had compassion. He went over to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on olive oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you spend." Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The one who showed mercy to him, he said. Then Jesus told him, "Go and do the same." This reminds me, Tim, when we do an AI test and we say make it easy, it says like the obvious definition, and then the 3 the most silly answers you could ever hear in your life. That was like what Jesus just did.
Total setup. He had no choice but to answer correctly, or he would have looked like an idiot.
So was that part of like the undercurrent here? Did I just pick something up?
I think you might have. Let's actually think through the characters first. The priest and the Levite. If you're first century and you're listening to this story in real time and you hear priest and Levite and you hear what they did, what are you thinking? Are you like, man, I can't believe they did that?
I think they were following God's law. I
disgusted?
think they were following God's law. Why?
Are they? That's
Thank
a
you.
question.
Yeah, that is a fantastic thing.
No, go ahead. You were reading on your own little thing over there. I'm just catching you up. It's like when you're in class, "Hey, Wally, what are you doing back there?" Hey, you get the answer to that question?
Yes, I do.
So what does the Levite, why is this such a big deal about a Levite not helping someone being wounded?
Well, I think first we need to look at, it says a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho.
So this is a dangerous road, is it not?
It is, and it's very important that all the action that we see from the priests and the Levites, they're coming down the road too, right?
Right.
So think of Jerusalem, that you always go up to Jerusalem in Scripture.
Yep.
So it's not a cardinal direction. Like up doesn't necessarily designate north. It just talks about elevation. So you're always going up to Jerusalem, or you're coming down from Jerusalem. So we have this man that's coming out of Jerusalem, coming down to Jericho, and then he meets this priest, right?
Yep. And if you've ever seen a picture of the road to Jericho,
Wikipedia has a great one.
it's about, in some areas, it's literally about 3 feet like wide with like this
Very
kind of
craggy,
cliff,
very craggy.
very craggy, and like a cliff on the other side. So I laugh when it says they went to the other side of the road. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, kind of,
They turn their heads over the cliff.
yeah,
I can't see him. I can't see him.
there's
Okay.
not much of another side is what I'm saying.
All right,
So how do most people see the priest and Levite in this situation?
I don't
With
know.
disgust,
Why?
I don't know.
because they're not having compassion.
Could they have a
They're
wrong
showing-
context?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
I don't
what
know.
context you're coming from, but
If it's Wikipedia,
When you say
bit of
most
a-
people,
why do-
do you
go ahead.
do you
Ron.
mean us or do you mean
Thank you,
the
Riley, that's what I meant.
contemporary listeners?
Yes.
No, I meant what context were you saying? That's what I was asking.
Oh.
You mean the listener that when
Exactly,
Jesus was
yeah.
speaking, or
That's
the
what we were
theologian?
asking.
Thank you, Riley. Thank you. He listens to you. And
Well,
doesn't listen to
let's
me.
let's go modern listener. How do we see the priest and Levite in this situation?
How Jesus wrote this in the first place was to us. But go ahead.
Yes.
We see them as bad people, Wally,
Why?
because they're
They're
self-righteous.
snobs.
They're snobs. They don't want to help someone. They're not living up. They're hypocritical. How did I do?
is there added emphasis because of what they do and who they are?
Yes,
Dad,
because we would
just
put them to a
tell
higher
what you
standard.
want to say. Stop with the rhetorical questions,
Yes.
please.
No, I like it.
Be like a lawyer.
Yeah.
Oh my
Last
gosh.
episode,
Killing
trying to
me.
tell
Just
me
say
that,
your
that
point.
this was a theologian or somebody that had a master's of divinity.
Expert in the law. Expert in the
in
law.
law.
It is interesting to see how different scholars will come at that because it's actually not super clear
Oh, really?
whether people would have felt disgusted or
In first century or today?
First century.
in first century,
Oh.
not how scholars are like explaining this today, because some will say that not only were they probably not disgusted, they were probably like, oh man, that must have been hard. They probably wanted to help, but they couldn't help because that term half dead is a really important technical term, right? It means like literally if left to themselves, they will die. They're like on the edge of death right then and there. In other words, he's not just wounded.
But Jesus is so, that's what makes him God. He's so good in how he tells the story and that the details matter,
Right.
right? So going down, so the priest is coming down from Jerusalem to, wherever they're going. And so here's this man that's half dead. So what does it look like to be half dead?
Bleeding out.
Bleeding out. You're probably unconscious, not talking.
Could be dead. I mean, it could look dead.
Look dead.
Right.
So why wouldn't a priest at that point in time stop and help him, right? We would say
Can't
that's
touch
ridiculous,
dead things.
right?
I think there's an Old Testament thing here. isn't there?
Leviticus chapter 22, verses 1 through 3.
There's an
says
expert in the law right there.
says, and the Lord said to Moses, speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, this is ESV, by the way, no one shall make himself unclean for the dead among his people, except for his closest relatives, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, or his virgin sister, who is near to him because
Not
she
the
has
other
no
sister.
Yeah, not the other.
The one that was out with the youngest son over in the law
The one that
series.
was that behind party.
Whoa.
Who is near to him because
That's
she has
great.
no husband. So this priest was doing what the law required of him, right? If he thought this person is dead, he touches this person, and what do they become unclean. So he's coming down probably from his time of service in the temple. They have a rotation for priests, and he's coming down, and he's got his holy food that he's carrying back to his family. Right?
These are all assumptions, but I like where you're going with this. This is really good.
And I'm glad that you.
I don't know about this holy food thing, but go ahead.
But he's got this food that is share of the sacrifice that he's bringing back to his family for them to share in. So he's trying to follow the law, and it also is going to cost him and his family sustenance and provision that's been provided for him by the law that he's trying to follow.
And yes, all that. And also, I think it's important to know that there are two groups of Jews involved here. Like, so you have the written law folks, which the priest and the Levite would have been a part of. These are the ones that took everything super literally, right? Like, they might be like our modern day fundamentalists, right?
Like the guy that asked the question in the first place.
A lowercase f,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's that guy.
Letter of the law. He knows that verse, and
Yes.
like, I'm not touching it. Then you had the oral law tradition folks that believe that the oral tradition went all the way back to Moses. And they had a kind of a different take on this, that not only by law were you allowed to help the man in the ditch that was half dead, that was the way that you fulfilled the law, was because life always came first, right? In fact, there's this beautiful Hebrew term,
Halakha.
pikuah nefesh, right? Pikuah nefesh. And piko means watching over or safeguarding. And nefesh is soul or life. And so it was this idea, they were the original pro-life party, right? So, and I find it really interesting is the Pharisees were part of the second group. We always think of the Pharisees as being super literal, super legalistic. And of course we know about the hypocrites, but a lot of scholars make the case that everyone listening would have been going, oh, I know this one. It's like the two come down. The third one is going to be the Pharisee. The Pharisee is going to come save the day.
Oh, so I'm catching up with the podcast listener because I'm not even trying to pretend to be the foil today.
It's
really natural.
As Rachel says, it's sometimes just natural to you, Jonathan. I mean, it's a
That's
stupid,
his wife, by the way.
ignorant foil. All right. So what you're saying though is that he picked two people. Jesus picked two people in this parable, untrue story, this parable, saying these two people had a religious obligation not to help this person, right? So they
According to
picked.
the written law, yes.
So they picked the law over life, and you're saying what the other could have been was a Pharisee. I feel like John on with Tim Mackey right now. The third person would have come from the angle of no, that's not what Moses was really teaching. Moses was teaching life over the law, right? And so what you're saying is what the expectation, they would be on the edge of their seat waiting for the third person to be the Pharisee, and they'd be like, he's going to help him. He's going to help him. But it wasn't him.
To Wally's point, it is master storytelling
It's a
by
bomb.
Jesus, because everyone's like, ooh, I know this one. He's going to basically come out and say that the Pharisee was right because the Pharisee chooses life over the law.
So do you think
Go ahead.
Thank you. Do you think the expert of the law was a Pharisee or a other person?
Sadducee.
Whatever the person that doesn't believe what the Pharisee believes.
Sadducee.
So you think he's a Sadducee?
I don't know.
I think so. It's a bit of a guess.
So
I would think so too.
Do you think that he was not setting Jesus up, but setting up to say we're right and the Pharisees are wrong? Ooh, I bet you Russell Moore wouldn't have come up with that one that quick.
No, I guarantee he wouldn't come up with that one.
I don't think he's going to come up with it. I don't think he's going to come up with it because it's not true.
Well, I'm just asking. I mean, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he be?
That wasn't the question. The question wasn't,
It is.
justification law. The question was, who's my neighbor?
Okay, I'll take on that. I still think I still have something.
I think it's very interesting that Jesus doesn't identify what sect that this person is a part of.
Which one? The
The
priest?
lawyer. Yeah.
The lawyer.
Yeah, the lawyer. He doesn't say.
Theologian.
Yeah, the lawyer. He doesn't say he's a Pharisee or a Sadducee. He just says a lawyer.
Right.
Some knowledge of the law.
I got it. I was wrong with the question. Moving on.
So yeah, I would think that the expectation would be, at least Israelite, but I think the expectation would have been Pharisee. And that's why it is quite the turn when the
Perverting
third
expectation.
character is this Samaritan.
Okay, so
Samaritan?
what's a Samaritan? Well, when I was studying this morning, and I typed
Studying
in
all
Wikipedia.
no, I'm going to get there. So when I was studying this morning, which I had to go look up in Google search where the Good Samaritan story actually was, and it brought up Wikipedia. It never said Luke 10, by the way. And then I started reading Wikipedia. Did you know
Probably.
that a Samaritan is not fully Jewish?
Yes. Why don't
Yes.
they fully Jewish?
Because they intermarried with non-Jew people?
From where?
Samaria.
Man.
Assyria. When the Assyrians came and overtook the northern kingdom,
Okay, so
they
this
intermarried.
So we're going to go back a little bit. So this is after the curse of Solomon. So God curses Solomon for intermarrying, but he did not allow his kingdom to be destroyed or bifurcated until he was dead. And after such time, the 10 tribes of just trying to keep smart because
Yeah,
I was trying to say
yeah,
smart I am.
yeah.
The 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, Assyria came and took the best and left the rest.
Ooh, he's like just
Rolling. And so what was left behind was a major problem. Who are these Jewish people going to intermarry and have children with? And they chose to break God's law, didn't they, Wally?
Yes, they did.
And what did they do?
They intermarried with the Assyrians, and they became, according to the pure Jews, they became dogs. They
yeah.
Okay.
Not even, they didn't even consider them made in the image of God, which is, I think, huge, especially coming off our last series. Like,
So he got the images and idols in there, right?
Yeah.
Did you see
Yep.
that?
All right.
Good luck.
So then, not only did they intermarry, which was a violation of God's law, then they actually defile the temple, do they not? They do. Wikipedia said they did. And
The internet's always
they
right.
brought some human bones into the temple or something. Anyway, they actually moved the capital of the Samaritans, not from Jerusalem to where?
tell us.
Samaria.
Oh.
Yeah, they created their own. Is this not true? Do you not know this?
That was
Have you not
the
researched
capital. That
Yes,
was
go
the
ahead, Rod.
capital before the Assyrians invaded, though. The king of Israel made it Samaria.
this? There it is.
I was
So they
reading
had
in
their
Second
own-
Kings a couple weeks ago.
So they had like your own little thing going on. They had the Jewish thing with their things, and we are the Samaritans. We have our own little thing, right?
We worship on this mountain. You
Y'all worship on that mountain, and we have our own laws here, and you have your own laws
Well,
there, and we got our own people here.
The first king Jeroboam set those two calves out because he was afraid that if they go back to Jerusalem to worship, then they'll abandon the northern kingdom and join the southern kingdom. So
You keep mesmerizing me with all your expert of the law stuff.
yeah.
So the point being
Yes.
here, though, this person would have looked in the story, a Jewish person listening to this story, especially an expert of the law, would have said, "Oh gosh, a Samaritan."
Or they would have perked up, going, "What's he doing in the story?"
Okay, sorry.
And I think it would have been
Rob.
even worse. I think like
Tell it.
it's hard for us to imagine, but like if you think about a social ladder, they literally put pagans on like the second to the lowest rung, and they put Samaritans below that rung.
Do we have anybody that's equivalent to Samaritan
I don't know. Do we?
in our culture that we just MS-13,
Hamas.
Hamas? I mean, yeah, maybe Hamas.
Yeah, but they weren't really trying to. Hamas and MS-13, those are kind of violent, subversive groups that are causing death and pillage. I don't think that's what a Samaritan was doing.
But we would see them as less than human.
Yeah, but we would see them because of what they were doing, not just because of who they were.
Who they were.
Yeah,
Not because
okay.
of prejudices that we already have. Yeah.
I don't know that we have an equivalent
I don't
in
either.
our culture to the
It's more individualized now. So now I feel like, depending on who you talk to, it might be those conservatives or it might be those liberals. You know, it's more about who's not on your side now. Is how I think we can take this from a relevant standpoint.
But from the roots, we'll keep running with the story here. So you're saying that Jesus surprises them all and says, "Ha, it's not a Pharisee, but it is a half-breed dog Samaritan that is just on a journey, and he comes across this poor guy bleeding out half dead."
100%. And I think that was the most shocking piece of this is like who that third character is and how they, when you think about it, when he answers the question of who is the neighbor, the guy can't even say it, the Samaritan. He just says, you know, the one that helped him out. That was all. It's like all he could get out. He's like, I can't even mention his name. And here's the other piece that I found really interesting. Samaritan, which group was he a part of? Would a Samaritan been written law that takes everything strict? Or would they have been like the Pharisees
I
and
don't
oral
know.
law?
I have to say, I have no idea.
or maybe no law at all.
Actually, they would have believed the same thing as the priest and the Levite. So this guy went against his own theology, which I find fascinating. Like he literally said, he threw out his theology to say, because he had compassion on the person that he saw, and then he goes to serve.
Yeah, would it have gone better had Jesus put a disclaimer on there for the priests and Levites saying he really wanted to, he had compassion for this guy, but he couldn't because the law said he
Well, yeah, but that's
couldn't.
probably a contextual thing that we don't get now that they would have gotten then.
You think he would have seen that the priest and Levite would have had compassion on this guy that's been beaten up and left half dead?
And that's why I say it's a
'Cause-
little bit contentious, because there are a lot of people that say, even with the written law folks, there was a loophole where you could do that, but it wasn't quite.
So you find it interesting that we called this parable the parable of the what? Good Samaritan?
Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
It's like there's
Not
bad
just
Samaritans.
Yeah,
Samaritan.
so like he's the one good one that's left. Like like Samaritan is a pejorative. It's always taken in a negative connotation.
It'd be like, oh, he's the good Democrat or
yeah,
the good Republican.
He's
And
the one good one that's left, and that
yeah.
it's just lucky this guy, you know. So in German, Tim knows some German.
You're
Bleeding
in my-
German in today.
in-
Man, you studied hard. Let's do
in
this.
studying this parable in seminary when I was getting my
German.
master's in German, there's a term called Feinbild.
I don't think you said that right in
By the way,
German, but
German
Fine
has the
bill.
best words, by
Yeah.
the way.
Feinbild. And it's actually the idea of the portrait of the enemy. So we have a picture of what we think the enemy or the person that's supposed to be the fool in this story is supposed to look like. But he totally subverts this picture of what the enemy looks like and how an enemy acts with choosing the Samaritan to be taking this role within this parable.
Okay, so you're mentioning enemy. So you're saying the theologian here who's asking this question is wanting Jesus to say it's a Pharisee and they did something wrong because they didn't follow the law? No matter.
It's a Samaritan.
Yeah, I've read the story a couple of times. But
No,
no, my point is, are you saying, you said that the portrait of the enemy, are you saying the expert of the law in the parable is looking to that person. He was expecting the enemy to be the Pharisee, but it was the Samaritan?
No, that they were expecting the enemy to be the Samaritan, but then he doesn't act like the enemy.
Oh, you mean once he mentioned his name, the Samaritan, he's
Yes.
like, oh, well, then he's going to do something
Yeah,
wrong.
like
But didn't he do something wrong, though? Did he not? According to Tim, he did.
well,
Well,
if-
not according to Tim, he didn't. But
I mean, well, we just know that the priests were not supposed to touch it. Well, you become unclean, but it doesn't
Right.
cost you anything if you're a non-priest or Levite.
whoa, 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 whoa.
It
But-
doesn't cost you financially.
Well,
It
I
doesn't
think could have
cost
been an Israelite, could have
That's
been the
right.
third person
That's
as
right.
well.
and so
so you're saying an Israelite could have helped him, but priest couldn't.
Correct.
yes,
Okay, moving on. Thank you for that.
I think that's
Clarification.
an important point. So then, yeah, so obviously the Samaritan helps him. And that goes back to what I said, I think last episode, is the answer to the question of who is my neighbor, although it has to do with this person that's in a ditch, it's that shock value of the Samaritan is the person I hate the most. And now you're telling me he is my neighbor that I have to love. And I think that is like the biggest point here is Jesus is redefining neighbor. It's not just about proximity. It's about finding the person you hate the most and you despise and saying that person is your neighbor.
Okay, so this is a really good point. I did not understand completely. So this is the question I've got. So is Jesus saying, to answer the expert theologian's question, your enemy, your neighbor is the Samaritan, or your neighbor is this beat up person on the side of the road?
yes.
Okay,
It
I got
depends.
that. I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
But he brings the Samaritan up intentionally. So is his crux, like I did that, crux of using Samaritan, he's more highlighting your neighbor is the Samaritan is your neighbor, the person that you don't respect, the person that's breaking out what you think shouldn't be done here. That is your neighbor. Oh, it's a dead guy too, but it's really the Samaritan is your neighbor. You're living on something that is not true about who you think and what you're entitled to inherit.
I think that's part of it, but also part of the issue is if you're a hearer, if you're original hearer to this parable, who are you identifying with in this?
Well, and that is the question. And the same,
Y'all are on it today.
Wally, the same question also applies to the legal scholar that's asking it. Where is he placed in the parable? Like, who is he supposed to be? And the obvious answer,
Priest Levite.
which is wrong,
Priest Levite.
is the priest and the Levite. Like, I don't think he is supposed to identify with those two characters.
Half dead guy.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, that's
Yes.
exactly who you identify with.
Oh
You're
my
not gonna
gosh, Riley! I completely picked the wrong answer and I got it right.
because you don't. You're not going to identify. If you're Israel, you're not identifying with the Samaritan.
Okay, I got that part, but I thought it was a priest and
But
Levite.
you're not. They're a totally different class than you. That's right. So the only person in this parable that you, as an original hearer, are going to identify with is the man that's beaten up, left half dead.
Or
the-
nobody, but go ahead.
But the question is, and in seminary when I was studying
Word
this
for more.
under Dr. David E. Garland, said
Or before Russell Moore's fans.
he said, now you got me all off track. We're talking about this parable, and he was sharing in terms of how do you identify with this person? Who do you want to do neighbor? In other words, Jesus asked, who was the neighbor to the? In other words, he said, who did neighbor?
Right. Who is neighboring?
Who was neighboring to this man that was injured? So it changes from not just who you are, who they are, but what do you do as neighbor?
Totally. Kenneth Bailey, who's one of the ones that's done a lot of work on the contextual piece, talks about it being such a reversal at this point. And you're right. It's both. It's not either or. It's, yes, the Samaritan is your neighbor, but it's also asking the question to the scholar and to us, hey, if you're beat up and you're half dead and you're on the verge of death, would you want your enemy that you despise, would you want him to come save you? The answer is usually yes. So that is the way we should reciprocate. We need to love in that way and across lines.
I thought you were going to put the connection between a half Jew helps the half dead guy, but I
Yeah.
didn't.
I like that.
Thank you, Tim. The Samaritan
That's an
is
interesting take.
It's
the
a very
Samaritan.
interesting
That's
text.
a unique take.
Samaritan
Very
is half
interesting.
Samaritan is half dead before God because he's not fully Jewish. Doesn't need to inherit, but he's important to God. He
So-
should be your neighbor.
So what does it look like to neighbor, according to this parable? What does this Samaritan do for this half-beaten, half-dead
I can read you the parable and tell you what he did. Is that what you're trying to?
He gives without any expectation of receiving anything back for himself.
Oh, that's a good point.
Okay, self-sacrifice. What about breaking maybe the law?
But again,
Or he
I mean,
didn't break the law.
he
the
broke his own law.
priest and Levite could have said, "My compassion for him overwhelms my obligation to the law."
That's what I just
to
said.
help. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm
Yeah.
affirming what I'm
Oh
affirming.
my
what
gosh,
you're saying.
Riley, I didn't even know he was affirming me. It
No,
felt like he was yelling at me.
And-
Okay. Yeah, we're excited there.
Oh my goodness.
No, but the priest and the Levite were unwilling to sacrifice the financial things that they had, the provision that they had in order to take care of the man that was half dead on the side of the road. The Samaritan was willing to sacrifice financially, even though just helping him out wouldn't necessarily have cost him financially, but he gives him olive oil, then wine to pour on the wound. He puts him on his animal. He pays for him to stay in the inn overnight. And then he says, hey, when I come back, anything else that you've had to pay to keep this man alive, I'll pay it. So he is financially sacrificing, even when he doesn't have to financially sacrifice at all.
But don't you think if the priest or the Levite, when they had their priest or Levite conference at the end of the year, they would have been like the people, the black sheep saying, "Oh, did you hear what he did? He touched a half dead person."
I don't think so.
Oh, you don't think that they were
No, 'cause
embarrassed by trying to?
there's rituals to become clean again. Like that's a provision in the law. They could be like,
Sure.
oh, and he's not dead.
And there were provisions even for the priest and Levite to do the right thing here. Like I don't think I think
I'm just going by what Wally gave me. I don't know that this law stuff.
I'm just going by what the law said.
right. And
My point
that's
is,
what they were doing. But I'm saying is there was enough provision even with that for them to kind of get away with it. And they would have looked great, I think, in the people's eyes that were listening to the story. They would have been like, you know what? That must have been hard and they chose life, and that's a positive thing.
Well, so this parable was kicked off by in 29 saying that the lawyer asked, who is my neighbor in order to justify himself,
Right.
right? And so he's trying to say, where's the guardrails? And all of a sudden now we see guardrails coming back in by these priests and Levites. We're staying within the letter of the law in order to do what's required of the law, but not necessarily the right thing at the right time for this individual. That my compassion for this individual in need overrides what cost it might come to me personally in order to fulfill what it looks like to, as Jesus says, what it looks like to be neighbor and to do neighbor.
And I know this part has been brought out by most people that do the parable of the Good Samaritan, that the word for compassion gives the connotation of like your guts, like you feel it in your stomach, in your guts so much that you're moved to action, right? It's something, it's not just a feeling, it's something that moves you to do something about that feeling. And to Riley's point, there's a lot of cost to this, right? It was not an easy thing. On top of that, we know that often that particular road, they would have set out traps. In other words, you would put out a half dead person and the robbers would just kind of be behind the rocks waiting for someone to come help that person. And then they would get robbed as well. And so talk about making themselves totally vulnerable. That's what this Samaritan did.
it goes on today, by the way.
How so?
Oh yeah, it goes on today. Someone's like broken down in the car, somebody gets out to help them, and then they get kidnapped.
We have
No
good
joke.
We have Good Samaritan laws on the books now.
I was going to talk about
Oh, they,
But
there
go
we
ahead,
go.
tell me,
No,
lawyer.
No, you're the expert in the law
Tell me,
here.
lawyer. Yeah, go ahead. But no, there is laws out there so that someone, even if they're a professional that might commit malpractice in helping someone in an emergent situation, would be potentially, depending on what state you are, immune from any malpractice if you were trying to help somebody.
And this
goodness to your heart, not
law
somebody.
came right after this happened in real life. Was this before or after he started the Good Samaritan?
No. Well, did you find it interesting that the only medical doctor of the three synoptic gospels, the only medical doctor brings up the Good Samaritan?
He's the only one that mentions this parable. You're correct.
Well, Timmy told me that earlier. So, and that's why we
It's
have
just
Good
those-
Samaritan clinics today, because the doctor did this. And do you know what denominations? Wally, do you know what a lot of denominations have Good Samaritan clinics?
No.
Timmy?
I'm going to guess Baptist.
So I think John the Baptist gets together with Dr. Luke, and they say, you start the Baptist church, and I'm going to start a Good Samaritan clinic.
John,
Well,
let's figure it all out.
Well,
Maybe he did half of that
those-
earlier. It's not
Those
on me.
opinions are directly from Jonathan alone, not reflective of Roots and Relevance as a whole.
Hey, my
Listen,
wife's
listen, listen,
grandfather
listen.
started the Good
Yes,
Samaritan
yes, he did.
Clinic, and your mom worked there for many, many hours,
What-
Many hours.
What
years and generations.
here we see this Good Samaritan. Let's get back on track here. We'll segue back into it.
Nice.
Um,
Thank you, Will.
Well, I'm kind of getting bored with this. Let's move on.
you know, in people in your life, they're really good in the short-term, immediate needs of people. You know, when somebody dies, you're quickly there to bring them a casserole or you know, man, is there anything you need and pray for them? And then 2 weeks later, they're hard to be found.
Yeah.
So Jesus thing, what looks like to be a Good Samaritan is not just investing in the short term in people's crisis, but investing in the long term.
It's relational.
Yeah, it's over the long haul. So I'm just not just giving you the money, but I'm going to come back by and check on him, and I'm going to give you whatever has been the cost to be able to take and provide for them. He was there for his long term.
Modeling what love actually is like, which
Mhm.
goes back to what, Jonathan, what you were saying earlier. It's not just writing the check, right? And
Oh, I thought we could do that.
Dang, I got to rethink everything.
yeah, exactly. No.
Oh no.
Yeah,
But can we bring another point? So I
Sure.
tried to mention this point. Everybody just kind of poo-pooed it. So
because it wasn't good.
We're going back to I was going back to the half Samaritan, half.
no, we're not. So let's go back to the dishonor of a priest or a Levite, as opposed to this violation of law. And I got Riley. I'm sure they could get purified from pretty much anything, but I think they still would have had this like scarlet letter help the Samaritan on their cloak to say, why did you do that? Why did you knowingly break the law? Now you have dishonor among us. Yes, you can cleanse yourself, but we still see you. Do you not think anything of that was there? And if there was, what does that say about the church today? Is there so many times that we don't want to violate what the people of our church think, or what maybe we've set up to believe, or you know, whether it's our constitution or how we react? We don't go and support those people with same-sex. What'd you say earlier? Attraction. You know, we just can't do
It
that.
was me that said that.
That's right. I did look at you there. Same sex. We just can't do that. I mean, if you're someone that's had an abortion, we will bring forgiveness. But someone's actually thinking about it and it's going to cross that nasty line of people screaming, and yelling at them, saying they're killers. You know, is that what we're doing? Are we willing not to break our boundaries of what we think is right and wrong, and look to the human being and what they're suffering and struggling with, to say we first have to look at them as humanity first, and then we can bring the tract out and somehow they're going to be wrong. I mean, to me, that's what this is. To me, more is you've here got the half-breed that's willing, could probably believe he was doing something wrong, but he didn't care, and that he's willing just to help somebody because, I don't know, it's freaking human dignity. Help somebody when
See,
they need help.
I would be careful with the word support.
Okay.
I would rather go with love,
Ooh.
you know, because support kind of implies acceptance. But if I'm acting out of love, maybe I'm not necessarily accepting of how you're choosing to spend your life, but I can still show Christ's love towards you.
You mean
If that makes any
condoning? You mean like supporting in the terms of condoning the?
Oh, you mean supporting what they're doing? Okay. How about support
Yeah,
their
no,
needs?
I know. You meant.
Yeah.
I would just be
I gotcha.
careful with the language.
Very
of it.
nice.
Yeah.
I know what you're doing there.
I mean, we don't
Yeah.
have to guess, right? Going back to David French, his article that we talked about last time, isn't the disgust that Christians felt when they watched the He Gets Us ad similar? Of like, no, we don't. Why would we like wash that person's feet? Why would we serve that person? It's that same thing that's in us, because there's this human thing that is not of God that wants to separate us from them, and those people don't deserve my love because I disagree with their lifestyle. And I'm with you, Riley. I think like Christians take what you said, which is correct, and then they take it too far
Like
to the
twist
point.
it.
And that's where you get all these things of like that empathy is a sin. A lot of Christians right now are talking about this idea that they call it the sin of empathy. And we've talked about that here before, which is, again, it's so counter gospel to me, is that we love people, period. And there's not a string attached as far as like, you have to live like I do, or you have to live like I want you to. I'm going to love you because you're created.
You're
in
being
image of
too
God.
nice. Or come to my church and then join the church and be a participant of my church. I mean, that's what we really, really want. And if you don't, well, we don't care about you. I'm sorry. Or we care about you, but we're just not going to invest, as Riley was saying, invest and
Or
yes,
when they do join the church,
You double talked on
Oh
me.
my goodness! Oh my goodness!
What just happened?
I'm just hearing an echo. There, it's off now. So, it's like when they do finally join the church, then our work with them is over, and we drop them like a hot potato.
And that sometimes it's when they stay in the church and they get inactive in the church. We're like, we got to help somebody else out now. And if they come in and out, and I think we just need to be very careful that because of the bounded set, because of the lines we have drawn, like the Levite did, rightly or wrongly, or the priest did, rightly or wrongly, they did have lines of demarcation of what they could not do, which I've learned today, which is really interesting. And they chose not to step over that line because of God, but they stepped right over the person that God would have helped himself.
That's well said. That's good.
Thank you. See?
Yeah,
It's another good job, Waller.
Heard of Rodney Stark,
No.
the historian?
Yes, fantastic. Rise of Christianity.
Christianity.
Fantastic book.
He not a Christian, but
Became a Christian after
did he really?
after he researched this book. He started looking at not only their orthodoxy but the orthopraxy, and he became a Christian because of this research he did on this book.
Yeah, it's so interesting. He talks about the explanation for why the church exploded when he did, and one of the things he said, the number one thing that these early Christians pre-Constantine were known for, enemy love, their love of the enemy, which makes sense. I mean, go back to the disciples. You have Matthew and Simon, the zealot, in the same group. You have like literally a tax collector that's working for the empire. And then the person that wants to throw over the empire, they're in the same small group. They're in the same community group. And it somehow worked because they're centered around Jesus. And I think like we don't get that in the church today. We want to separate and just get people like us around us and not have to dialogue with whoever our other is.
So I'm looking at this parable, and I'm looking at verse 27. 26, he asks the question. 27, he answers, and then Jesus says, "You've answered correctly.
Go.
Do this, and you would live."
And then mine says, go.
And do likewise?
Well, that's the first part. And then
Sure.
he comes back here in 36 after he tells the parable, and he says, which of these three? He asks a question. The lawyer, the theologian, / whatever it is, answers the question, and then Jesus says, go and do likewise. Is Jesus then making a correlation between what it looks like to do this and live in verse 28 and what the actions of the Samaritan is in this parable, with him saying, go and do like the Samaritan did for this other?
Is this a trick question? I would say yes.
No, I'm just not a trick. I just, is he saying, if you're truly wanting to inherit eternal life, this is what this life looks like lived out in the lives of others?
And it really kind of just
Yes.
makes me mad. Thank you, Brian. I've already, yes, for sure. It really makes me mad. If you hear a go, what do you first think of? Anybody? Come on.
Good, the Great Commission.
Great Commission. Go. We got to help those poor people and colonize them and make them like little Jesus people.
That was not necessarily the original
Okay, that's
intent.
not the
Great
It
Commission,
became that
but
with
okay.
certain aspects of established church. But
That's what I'm saying. I'm talking about what Jesus said. I'm talking about what the church says. But we never hear the go and do likewise on this one. Go love the other that doesn't look like you and is probably doing things wrong, or they put themselves in a bad situation. You don't need to go
or
help
to
them.
cost you individually, financially, and things.
Or your
reputation.
dignity, reputation, honor, shame, whatever. But definitely go out there and give a tract and save somebody.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's just, it's.
Which is easier? Which is easier for the church to say, to be able to put it in the matrix?
The former.
I don't know.
I'm sure say what's
one's
quantifiable. Yeah.
It goes to what we've often talked about, the bounded set versus, this idea of we're going to create a boundary. And if you're not like us, then you're out there. But to me, the gospel and a church that is really embodying this parable should be very diverse. Like, in other words, they should look different. They should have different points of view, just like Matthew and Simon, they modeled that as the original disciples. Instead, what we do is we want to find the people that are just like us and they're part of our church and other people are not. And I think that's one of the biggest issues in the church today.
So what's the take home for people listening to this parable? What are we supposed to do with it?
Go and do likewise.
Which is,
Go love
that,
your neighbor.
What does that look like?
Anybody that you come across, happenstance. You look, you think, you listen, you help. That's what you do. And if you give them a tract, you give them a tract. But it doesn't always have to end like that. That's how I come up with it. A little heretical, but that's what I did.
Yeah.
No?
Not.
It's a ordo. What do you say? Ordo armorist, right? Ordo armorist.
Arterus, Orderus,
whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
In other words, you don't necessarily always have to worry about. I'm not saying we don't go do this, but it's the people that come in and around you, whether that's a website or internet. Or,
As you live your life.
you don't Hickle halakha. Those that you walk and see, you help. You don't look over them to go help somebody else, because you'll never find someone to help, because you're always looking for the next person that looks like you to help, or you've been in their situation. I mean, I think that's my takeaway. Go and do likewise. Find the people that are in need, no matter who they are. No matter who they are.
So everybody we see on the side of the road that's got a sign we need to give to.
You got to be wise about what you do.
Everyone is your neighbor, right? Like everyone.
We did. No one ever sang it. Would you like to be my...
Thank you, Mr.
Oh
Rogers.
my goodness.
Awesome. Well, I think we've done a deep dive on that. It took 2 episodes, but hopefully that has been helpful to you guys. And next time we will hit with another parable. We're toward the end of our series now. We're going to do the parable of the vineyard
We
worker.
have one more parable left, Tim.
Is that it? Just one
I
more?
thought you said one more.
I think we have 2 more. I was talking about the next one. But
My lingo dose.
Those parables left.
Yeah.
yes. All right. Well, have a great week, everyone. We will see you next time.